I want to welcome you all here today. My name is Tony Andriotis. I'm the president of the Greek Chamber of Commerce in Japan. I'm delighted to have you all in the room today. I wanted to thank all our other stakeholders. I wanted to thank the European Business Council, Danny Risberg, for being with us today. I wanted to thank the Greece-Japan Center for being with us today. I wanted to thank Junko as well, who's who runs a website on Greece-Japanese relations and culture. We have a lot of people, our videographer, that have really done a great job supporting us on this, so thank you very much. I particularly wanted to thank Konstantin Suamoto, Omako, who's coming over now with a microphone. And he approached me about this function a few months ago. And he told me, Tony, I'm thinking about inviting Mr. Alexis Papahelas to come speak. I had heard his name before, but just based on the name Alexis Papahelas, I said absolutely. The name Papahelas in Greek means father of the Greeks. So if we're not going to invite a man named father of the Greeks, why not? And his first name, Alexander. Alexander's the guy who spread Hellenism throughout the world. So that's a perfect, I have to compliment your family for giving you that name, Mr. Papahelas. And then when I looked deeper into his profile, I saw that he is a New York educated Greek, and I am a New York educated Greek, so I said, absolutely, let's have him come over. Had I known he would draw such a crowd, I would have invited him to come earlier. This is wonderful. We are a new chamber, we are growing, we need your support, and we're grateful to every one of you for being here. Thank you. And I encourage you all to ask Mr. Papahelas questions. I had given him a few questions I had in mind, and he smiled and he said, Tony, you can ask me anything you want. I am conveying that contract to the rest of the people in the room. I am a lawyer, I think, in terms of contractual relationships. It is my great honor and show my gratitude and to introduce Ambassador Karatsolis from Greece to Japan. He's a friend. He is a wonderful ambassador. He represents us well on a daily, if not minute-by-minute basis. There are also wanted to thank all the people from the embassy here in the room today. Dionysis, for example, Protopapas has been instrumental in putting this together as well. So thank you, everybody. But I hand it over to the ambassador, please.
Thank you, Tony, and thank you. I would like to also, on my part, to congratulate the European Business Council and the Greek Chamber of Commerce for organizing this magnificent event today. It's actually our first big event, and we are very glad that we are hosting Mr. Papahelas, not because Mr. Papahelas is very experienced and one of the most prominent political analysts in Greece with many years of experience in the media, but also because his presence here underlines the growing interest of Japan in the developments in our part of the world. As you may know, Greece lies in a very particular geographic location. It's actually a bridge between two continents, Europe and Asia, and today is facing a double challenge, very serious, two very serious challenges actually. The one is the challenge of the spreading of the conflict in the Middle East and the adjacent area of the North Africa, the deteriorating security situation there. On the other hand, it has to cope with unprecedented migration flows. These migrants are a mixed group, refugees from the conflict area, but also economic migrants who seek a better life in Europe. So in this particular juncture, the situation has shown that the society in Greece has shown a very remarkable cohesion and remarkable solidarity. And this story has to be better presented in the media. We, at the embassy, we always encourage media representatives from Japan to visit Greece and experience firsthand the difficulties facing not only the government agencies active on the ground, but also these hardships and the burdens that actually are now accumulated on small communities, on small islands that face the bulk of the migration flow. In any case, this is one of the opportunities that we are presenting the situation, the Greek situation, and the different challenges. But Greece remains an island of stability, it projects stability, and hopefully through this adverse economic climate, we will have a better understanding and better create better conditions for the future. So enough from me. I would like again to Papahelas.
Thank you, Mr. Pastor. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm not sure I want to thank Konstantinos who got me into this trouble of having to prepare for a presentation in Japan. It's good to see my good friend Mr. Papahelas, who was a former ambassador to Greece, a very good friend. And I also want to say upfront that we're very grateful, my wife and I, because we've been invited by the Japanese government for this trip, and it has been a wonderful, a truly wonderful experience. I will not make the cardinal mistake that every Greek journalist who respects himself usually makes, which is to consider myself a Japan expert within 3 days. I think by Saturday I will be.
It takes about 5 days, that's perfect.
And I think I know a lot about the South Eastern China Sea now, to be able to say with conviction that our China is Turkey. It's a very similar kind of situation, but I will not get into this because it's a complicated matter. I want to talk today about 3 things. One is I want to talk about the European experience with populism in the last few years, because I think it's a very important historical episode that has a lot of implications for the rest of the world. I want to talk about some of the geopolitical lessons that we've learned through the Greek and the European crisis, because I also think that's important. And I also think that's important for Japan in some ways. And finally, I'll talk just briefly about the future of my country, of Greece, the way I see it, because I know a lot of you are interested for many reasons in Greece. First of all, let me say that obviously the world is going through a very dramatic, very significant period of change. Europe is losing its standing, and it has had to face very harsh realities, economic many realities in the last few years. The challenge that we're facing as Europeans is put in very dramatic terms, if you want, by Chancellor Merkel when she usually makes a speech where she says that Europe has 7% of the world population, 25% of the world's GDPs, and 50% of the world expenses on welfare state. Let me repeat this, it's 7% of the world population, 25% of the world GDP, and 50% of the total welfare spend. And I think rightly so, she claims, and I agree with her actually, I don't agree with her on everything, but I agree on this, this is not a sustainable balance. I think that Europe is facing 2 crises. One is a crisis of competitiveness on the world stage. It's very hard for us Europeans, with the kind of the standard of living, the salaries and the benefits and everything else, to compete, especially with some of the Asian states, as you know. And the second is the lack of access to capital. It's getting harder and harder to be able to borrow on the world market to sustain this kind of welfare state. And except for some Central and Northern European countries, it has become more of a challenge. Greece was the first to face this reality in a very harsh way, because it reached a point in 2010 where basically it could not sustain the government deficit, and also it couldn't access world markets. It has since lost about 26% of its GDP. It's a tremendous change. I mean, from 242 billion in 2008, we went down to 179 in 2014. Unemployment has gone up from about 10%, has gone up to 22, 23. Youth unemployment has reached phenomenal levels. We're up to 50% in the youth unemployment. And we've also had, as a consequence, the brain drain. A lot of good people, dynamic people, productive people have left the country. I'm sure some of them are present here in Tokyo. Greece, of course, was not the only country that faced this kind of crisis. It was also Italy, Spain, Portugal, and others. And I think as Europe was facing this challenge, the middle class felt a tremendous pressure. For many decades, all over Europe, there was sort of a social contract between the politicians and the voters. The idea was that every generation would have a better future than the previous one, that people could get a job with the state, or at least get some job security, even if they were hired by the private sector. And this is when populism came into the picture. Extremists on the left and the right, they took advantage of this kind of insecurity. And as you always know, it always happens, populists thrive on scapegoating. They blame globalization, and they convince people that there are very simple solution, quick fixes to very complicated problems. And in Greece and in the rest of Europe, there was a feeling of insecurity in the last few years, and we've seen this in other cases, where people thought that somehow some populist politician could make the train of globalization stop and make sure that they get off it, because they were very worried with the speed and the lack of certainty about the direction of this train. In Greece, we're hit also by another crisis, which was the immigration crisis. Greece is on the front line of these big fault lines between the Middle East and Europe. So when Syria and Libya collapsed, we were faced with this tremendous challenge of thousands of refugees coming into our country. It's, to me, very interesting that politically it didn't affect us. We didn't have as much xenophobia, we didn't have this kind of rise of nationalism that you saw in other countries that were affected by the same flow when the refugees moved up north. But still, I think this is a challenge that is going to be faced by Europe in the next few years. It's not something that's going to go away. It's something that's going to be with us for a while. I have to say that populists were very lucky in some ways. They found a powerful tool in the form of social media. I truly believe that this new form of communication is already leading to social and political ruptures that were experienced at very critical moments of history centuries ago. Angry people find a voice through the social media, and they also find unexpected allies, other people who think alike. They create their own bubble, they reinforce each other's views. And social media also promotes polarization. The people who stand in the middle, the people who usually argue for reasonable kind of positions, there's no space for them. There's so much bullying from the left and the right that it's very hard to stay there and be active, arguing for a reasonable position. Because of this, and because of the economic crisis, a lot of the average people, they reject mainstream media, and they prefer to cherry pick from conspiracy theories or all kinds of wild arguments from the realm of social media. This is causing a real revolution. We've seen this in Greece. I almost think Greece was the first testing ground for this, because our crisis, our economic crisis, coincided with the blossoming of social media. But you also see this in the case of Brexit, you see this in the case of the Trump victory, you see this in many other cases. Extremists, they gain strength, and anti-systemic politicians and anti-systemic media became very dominant in this kind of environment. I have asked myself, what is the antidote to all this? Is there a solution to all this? Because these are deeper kind of changes that, again, will not go away. Well, first of all, I think it's very important to listen to people's concerns. I think what happened in Greece, but also it happened in the US, it happened in the UK, it happened in other places, the local establishments and the global establishments, in many ways, have become deaf to people's concerns. It is easy, for this to happen because members of the elites, and I know from my experience how this can be sometimes, aspire to the same values, they hang out with the same people, the same kind of places. And as Mark Thompson, the president of the New York Times, recently told me, they are training now their reporters to go out of New York and go into real sort of the heart of America and listen to people's concerns in order to understand what American society is all about. And I think this is a lesson for all of us. We have to be very keen on understanding what's going on. The worst thing that political leaders can do is to look down at angry people. It happened with Hillary Clinton. It has happened in other cases in Greece and elsewhere. And it's very important, in my opinion, that the populists are argued against. in ways that are understood by everyone, not just top-down. I think this is essential. In Greece, the old political system failed to do this and was destroyed within a few years. We had a very stable system, like yours, like Japanese, two-party system. It was basically destroyed within a few years just because their leadership could not keep up with events and couldn't really address the problems of the people. In the UK, the same happened. I think it was a tremendous failure of the establishment. I personally think France is the only real exception. It's also a beacon of hope for me, because Macron demonstrates the urgent need for non-populist politicians to reinvent themselves, repackage themselves, away from traditional kind of old, typical post-war kind of leadership roles. I think if France manages to reform itself, if Macron succeeds, this is going to be extremely positive for Europe, because with the challenges that we're facing in the next few years, France is the real cornerstone. It's the litmus test of where Europe is going to go. Let me say now a couple of things about geopolitics. I think Europe again is facing a challenge there because Europe has been spoiled. It's not only Europe, that's the case for other countries, after World War II, because all the security concerns were taken care of by the US and by the transatlantic alliance. This is not the case anymore. We see the US withdrawing, at least from the European front, quite a bit. We see the US and President Trump not willing to pay for the traditional share of the US in defense expenditure and so on.
Why are you looking at me?
I don't know why. It's not New York's fault. And I think that Europe has to make some very hard decisions in the next few years. It has quite a bit of soft power, as we know, culturally, commercially, and so on, but it lacks hard power. And one of the reasons that Europe is not taken seriously on the world stage is because there's no real tools of hard power in its own hands, and because everybody knows that if you want to appeal to the White House, you know who to call. If you want to call Europe, you have to call a lot of people and probably wait for a few days before you get an answer. So I think that's a real challenge we're going to face, and that's combined with immigration and terrorism and security kind of challenges. I think Europe has to get really serious, grow up in that sense. I hope Greece is going to participate in the hardcore of this new project, which I see is going to develop. Geopolitically speaking, let me say there have been two new actors on the stage in the last few years. One is, of course, Russia. Everybody's trying to figure out, what Russia is up to, what exactly they're doing. I think they are taking advantage of this new realigning of the Western political system, Western values. And they wouldn't mind if Europe was sort of drifting away from the US. They saw different kind of risks, even within Europe. And then we have China. China was a very distant power for all Europeans for a long time, especially for Greeks. We knew very little about China, but we have discovered that China is a power to reckon with in the last few years. I know there's been some concern in Tokyo and other capitals about the increasing presence of China with investments, with infrastructure and so on, in Greece and other European countries. Let me say, it's hard to argue against the Chinese presence so far in Greece, because China was there when Greece needed the support of a great power. Clearly, they don't have shareholders, they don't follow spreadsheets, so it's for them, to invest in Greece was rather a strategic and very political decision, but it actually happened. They also helped Greece because they argued against Brexit with Mrs. Merkel and others, and that really had a tremendous impact. It was the US and China basically who did that. So I do know that there's a lot of concern about that, but I have to explain the Greek case and how the average Greek and the Greek political establishment see these things. I do think there's an issue with Chinese influence, whether there's going to be leverage on political issues and so on. But I think this is very important that's been dealt with at the global European level. No country can deal with this effectively on its own. I'm very sort of clear about this. So finally, let me just say a couple of words about Greece and the way I see it. I'm actually optimistic about Greece. I mean, we've been through a lot. Actually, we've been through so much that I'm quite amazed that we didn't have a worse kind of social unrest, political unrest, and so on. I don't think any country can really sort of survive socially or from a social cohesion point of view this kind of crisis without tremendous kind of effects. I think we have actually matured quite a bit. As probably most of you know, we elected a leftist government 2.5 years ago. They campaigned very much against privatization, against private investments, and so on. But reality has a very funny way of sort of winning in the end of the day. So, we've reached the point now where our Prime Minister, with all this kind of background, goes to Washington, meets with Mr. Trump, and they feel like, almost at the same page. And they've been supporting privatizations, they've been supporting private kind of investments. There's a lot of work to be done. I don't want to fool anybody in terms of bureaucracy and all these things, but a lot of things have happened, a lot of reforms have happened and they're actually taking place. And the good thing is that this has an effect on the average Greek as well. There's a cultural change in the country. For many sort of bizarre historical reasons, there was a lot of suspicion towards capital investment or foreign investment and so on. None of this is there anymore, and that's very, very, very important. And also, I think that it's crucial that we have an opposition which is very supportive of reforms. They are very supportive of the same kind of agenda. So really, it's kind of a, my opinion, win-win situation. I don't think there's any room for surprises. I just had lunch with a very senior Japanese diplomat who told me that two things are very important for Japanese business people when they make investment decisions. One is transparency, and the other is predictability. And I'm happy to say we have moved ahead on both fronts. First of all, a lot of these things, the privatizations and so on, are happening under EU supervision, under very sort of clear governance regime. And also we're becoming much more predictable. We're not a boring country yet, but we're more predictable. In the sense that the Brexit is completely off the table, we're part of the EU, part of the Eurozone, part of NATO. I don't think there are any real surprises looking around the horizon for anybody who wants to come and invest in Greece. And I think more of this is going to happen because, for two reasons. One, Greece is becoming a very important logistical hub in terms of energy, in terms of commerce, and in many other ways. And secondly, because it's a very cheap country, just to be very realistic. Assets have dropped dramatically, so there are tremendous opportunities in tourism, in real estate, logistics, and so on. And you see a change there. You see, as the country is returning to growth and the stability is returning, you see more interest on behalf of investors. So I'll leave it at that. And ready for your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Papahelas. The way I think we should handle this moving forward is, if you have any questions, please raise your hand. Just like school, I'll choose you, and then please, we'll allow voice to your question, and if it wasn't well heard, I'll just rephrase it for your listening pleasure. So, who has some questions? Please.
My name is Simone. I'm a freelance journalist here in Tokyo, and you talked about the rise of divisive social media, and for example, fake news being a major problem. It's influenced elections we've seen over the past few years. What do you see in more concrete terms as the possible, you talked about antidote or solution to these problems? Fake news seems to be eroding the power of journalism to sway the electorates one way or the other. People are turning away from mainstream news because of fake news and these extremist views on social media. How do you think that journalists like yourself can combat the fake news phenomenon?
Well, first of all, it would be a huge mistake to become more populist ourselves. And I know this is a trend, a lot of media think that oversimplification and populism is the answer. I don't buy that. you have to do two things. One is address of a lot of the conspiracy theories, a lot of the stuff coming out of the social media. Don't ignore it, but actually prove that it's wrong. And I think with time, self-regulation is going to set in. People will realize that there's a lot of crap out there, and we shouldn't underestimate people. I think at the end of the day, people are going to decide, what's real sort of legitimate and what not. At the same time, I think we have to, as I said, be much more sensitive to people's concerns. We shouldn't just write about things that concern the elites or very small niche of the readership or the viewership. So I think that's a very important job we have to do, and this is a change of paradigm. It sounds simple, but it's not as simple as might seem. And then I also think the politicians have a lot to do with this. I mean, they have to be on Twitter, they have to be on every social media. American friends who work in campaigns or other kind of venues, I mean, they tell me that basically they have 24/7 shifts, because if a conspiracy theory goes wild at 3 o'clock in the morning, somebody has to answer by 6, otherwise it becomes news. It's a completely new game. It's not an easy game, but I think, you can't be in India politics and not play it.
Thank you very much. Question number 2, please. Please state your name as well and your position.
Okay, so my name is Andriotis. I'm part of the Greek Chamber of Commerce and working in real estate investment in Tokyo. Thank you very much for today. Everybody said it. Sorry to repeat it. My question relates more to China and the potential role in Europe. My opinion, starting with that, is that Europe has no idea of what's coming. In 1997, or a few years later, when Hong Kong joined China, Hong Kong was 27% of total China's GDP. Now it's less than 3%. This happened in 20 years. The size is extreme, and now you have China really trying to do this new One Road, One Belt initiative and expand this. We saw a little bit in Greece what is coming, in a good way, that's not necessarily in a bad way, but the level of influence and capital are coming. How do you see Europe responding, not responding, accepting that?
Well, my favorite statistic is, which I picked up by reading Graham Allison's book, is that China created a new Greece in terms of GDP every 16 weeks, every 4 months, which is very dead. Well, I think that the European leadership is becoming very sensitive to these kind of issues. You see Mrs. Merkel, you see the Commission and others talk about the need to have some sort of limits in the amount of infrastructure, mergers that China can do. And also I think they're very sensitive to the political trade-offs. I mean, how much conditionality is placed, how much Europe can say about human rights and all these kind of things, all these kind of linkages, let's say. But I mean, China is a reality. It's, knowing that the sun is going to rise. I don't think it's, it's very difficult, for Europe to deal with it on its own. And I think what's important, actually, and I think obviously the US is the critical part of this. There's going to be a challenge of the sort of the Western liberal system, the values and all this that was created after World War II. If the US manages to keep its traditional alliances with Japan, with Australia, with Europe, and actually fight for this kind of value.
Please.
Hello, my name is crises. I'm just do some non-profit projects and I'm interested in the subject. Going back to the fake news you mentioned before, you mentioned about the politicians' change of behavior and also the journalists being able to act. How about education? People are not just critical thinkers at all. When they just go out and believe whatever is out there. So, is there any initiative at all for people to be able to kind of understand how to distinguish between what is fake and what is true?
There have been such initiatives in Europe, not in the US so much. We need more of those. I mean, we need more of those in Greece. I mean, sometimes when one of my daughters tells me something and she states this as a fact, and I say, where do you find this out? It says the internet. I'm like really scared because there's no filter judgment there. Yeah, I mean, I think it should be very important in school, to sort of teach them, what's okay, what's not. It's not an easy choice to make, obviously, sometimes, because there's always, the room to make an error and sort of try to disqualify anything you don't agree with. That's not the point. The point is whether you can have legitimate points of, information. And I think that's of tremendous importance for kids. And I think you'll see more of that in the West. That's my opinion.
Mr. Papahelas, just piggybacking on that question, when we deal with this universe of fake news, I think some people mean it to be exactly that, fake news, deliberately created to be fake, where some of it comes from ignorance or a desire to be drawn to conspiracy theories, let's say. Well, what percentage do you think of fake news is politically instigated fake news, and what percent do you think is just bad judgment?
Well, I think there are three categories. One is, political or for political reasons, or maybe foreign power being behind it. I think that's about, 30%, something like that. 30%.
Foreign powers that will remain nameless, right?
Yeah. It's a generic term. And I think that's, the problem with that is that it's very systematic. It's very sort of, they follow a very clear methodology and it's very systematic. Then it's, fake news, which basically sells. So, if a site gets more hits for saying that, you and I were in Amsterdam today instead of Tokyo.
That was last week.
So, they will keep repeating that until, they make record hits. It's a very simple fact of life. I mean, conspiracy theories, spicy stories sell much more than mainstream boring truth. There's no way around it. And then there is bad judgment. So, I would say that, as I said, I think there are three categories. My problem is that, it's become so much more expensive for newspapers or TV stations to keep up with good journalism. And it's become much more superficial, and I see this in the US, on network news, I see this in Greece. We cut down on our foreign bureaus, we cut down on wire services. And that makes it much more difficult for us to sort of report in a balanced way on matters which are not, immediate concern to us.
Just to further New York, what you just said, you're trying to say, I guess, that smut sells, that garbage sells. So, what do you think the role of the media is, or journalists? Would you prefer a system where it's not about the market, where the media just gives information, or is it going to be a free market as it is now, where you give the people what they want?
Well, I think this is a free market, and I wouldn't change that for anything, because I think in the end, it makes us better journalists, and it makes for a better product, and I wouldn't want the government to protect us in any kind of way. I don't mind non-profit or civic kind of initiatives like the ones in the US or in Europe for better journalism and this kind of thing. I think that's a good thing. But I like what they're doing in the US now. It's I don't know whether you've noticed, but the two big liberal mainstream newspapers are giving a real battle. I mean, Trump was elected basically saying that they report fake news and all this. They came back with better journalism, more passionate kind of journalism, which is not always my taste, but it's okay, it works. And huge campaigns in order to raise their subscriptions and their readership. And I think that's the way to do it. If you sort of put your head down and say, I cannot deal with this, people are idiots, I'll just appeal to my little readership, it doesn't work.
Okay. Opening it back up to the floor, in the back, please. Please speak loudly, and if I don't hear you up front, you're going to have to come up, okay?
Okay, my name is Brian Cathcart from Globus. Thank you for a wonderful presentation. I just wanted to ask you two things if possible. Number one, I was interested in your point how Greece has not been affected as much by refugees and immigration. It didn't have the nationalist effect that it had elsewhere. Could you tell us a little more why, and maybe if there's any lessons for Japan? And also, if you had any comments on Turkey or relations with Greece, Turkey, that'd be great.
One moment, could you just tell us a little bit about what Globus is? Because I think that's relevant.
Okay, thank you. Globus is, we're the largest MBA school in Japan. We're also a corporation. We have a venture capital arm, and I personally run a G1 global conference. It's like a World Economic Forum for Japan, September 30th next year, October 14th next year, and it's one of the best conferences in Japan. So please, if you're interested in more about it, I feel like
We're
I'm
waiting for
selling.
invitations, okay?
You got it. No problem. Thank you.
Immigration. It's strange because a lot of people were very worried in the beginning because the numbers were overwhelming, and we thought that was going to be a sort of an uproar in Greece. We thought that the small sort of ultra right-wing party was going to gain a lot of strength. It didn't. Why did this happen? I don't know. I think we're very sort of tolerant people as a society. When a lot of my foreign colleagues, asked me about this, I said that, we have very vivid memories of our own grandmothers telling us stories about how they came from Turkey as refugees. And it's something that, everybody has sort of grown up with. And I also think that the quality of the refugees, at least the first phase that came in, was quite high. I mean, there were people, professionals from Syria who lost everything, doctors and lawyers and others. And there were people who were very, they came under very difficult conditions. They went through hell, but they sort of respected the rules and what Greece is all about. The other thing is that Greece is more of a transit point because of our economic crisis. There are not that many people who look at Greece as the final destination. Everybody wants to go out to Germany or the Netherlands or something. And people realize that at some point. So we realized that there's no way that we're going to get like an astronomical amount of kind of refugees because mostly people want to go up north. Turkey. Well, Turkey is a difficult neighbor. We made a very smart decision years ago that we want a strong, predictable Turkey, which is anchored in Europe. That was a huge change for our political system, but I think it was a very smart, very good decision. Turkey has, a lot of problems, to put it mildly. It has opened up a lot of fronts with the Kurds in Syria and everything else. And secondly, it has a lot of internal divisions. We are talking about two Turkeys now. There's a very secular Turkey, which is extremely pro-European, and there's Erdogan's Turkey. And life is not very happy for the first part. I have friends of mine, journalists who are in prison. It's very hard to be an academic and have your own opinion in Turkey and all that. And the European-Turkish relationship is going through a bumpy ride because, Europe and Greece were facing this very complicated challenge. I mean, we want, to be very clear about, what Europe wants in Turkey in terms of human rights, in terms of respecting some values and all that. But at the same time, we don't want to alienate the rest of the society, which still keeps up to the European future as the only hope. Because if you completely close the door and say, Turkey will have no ties to Europe, that's it. I mean, these people are going to be very desperate. They will have nobody to look to as sort of, for some reassurance. Our fear is always that, when Turkey goes through a period of instability and domestic kind of trouble, that it might export this to the Aegean, to our own East China Sea, let's put it that way. We've seen, quite a bit of that in terms of an aggressive pattern of overflights and naval presence and all this. The good thing is that our partners, because of the refugee crisis, are actually present. They have military assets on the area, and now they have a very clear picture of what's going on, and they've been quite supportive. And hopefully it's going to be managed like it has always been. I mean, we always go through this kind of low-level confrontations, but I think we've learned how to deal with this kind of instability.
Please, the back.
Thank you very much for a great presentation and Q&A. My question is actually,
Name,
so my name, yes, sorry.
Affiliation.
Affiliation. Okay, my name is Ayam Hatano, and I'm a visiting scholar at NYU New York University, the US Asia Law Institute. And I'm a human rights scholar and human rights law scholar. And then my question, I have two questions if possible. And the first one is related to the previous two questions. And then, in Japan, and hate speech was a big issue and a social problem phenomenon in these recent years. And then, I think it's kind of populist politics or international relations also influence that kind of their hate crimes, the hate speech in society. And then I'm just wondering, in Greece or in Europe, I think there's a lot of program and regulation of the hate speech, especially in the internet. It's related to fake news, but not exactly the same. So if you have any opinion on a regulation of what the hate crime, hate speech issues that are going in Greece and in Europe, and then how to regulate it, I would be really appreciated to hear your opinion. And then second one is, what do you think about Brexit influence on the Greece economy and also EU's? So not only economical influence, but also maybe it's the influence, the political influence on each countries in EU. So thank you very much.
Thank you. That's quite the questions. That could be 3 other seminars, but let's see if we can squeeze it in.
Yeah. I would have said no.
Next speech.
Hate speech. Well, there's European laws, against hate speech, which has been adopted by Greece. I'm skeptical about over-regulating this kind of, the market of ideas, because it can always have very detrimental effects on free speech and so on. Maybe this is my American training, but that's what I believe about this. That's what I believe about this. And the other thing is, I don't want too much political correctness, because we've seen the results of that in the US. So I think that, sometimes when people become, they react in a sort of, very powerful kind of way to something that they think is hate speech, but the other person thinks it's just, expressing their extremist position. This can really backfire, and we've seen that a lot, and it's a very difficult kind of balance. I think it's going to be, there's a war going on between extremism and populism on the outside and the voice of reason on the other, and I think the way to win the war is by arguing for the liberal positions. As a friend of, not a friend, but somebody I know, said in a forum in the US. It's important for the liberals not just in the political sense, I mean the sort of value system, to keep their spine and their heads together. I mean, I think that's the most important thing to do, not to try to overregulate this. I don't think it's going to work. Brexit, I'm worried about, because first of all, it has a domino effect. I think what you see now, like in Spain or even in northern Italy, there's sort of a feeling that it's okay if somebody leaves Europe. It's okay if a province leaves a country. I mean, that's scary stuff, because it's like going back to the 20s and the 30s. So I think in that way it had a very destabilizing effect. In a sense, it was a great wake-up call, like Trump was for Europe, because all of a sudden European leaders said we have to get our act together and we have to set a very clear compass for where Europe is going to go. So I think it helped in some ways. And the problem, of course, is you cannot have a strong Europe on security issues and hard power without the UK. The UK still has very good defense, intelligence, security capabilities. I cannot see a Europe without the UK, at least with a special kind of relationship on this kind of matters. But I think there's an understanding of both sides of the channel that this should happen.
Thank you. We got that in 5 minutes, which was very impressive. Please.
Hi, my name is Nikos Chorman. I work as a software developer here in Tokyo. And I would like to go back to the social media. You mentioned that with the rise of social media, we get to see this bubble that people find like-minded people, and we have a self-assuring, self-feeding cycle of ideas, which leads to polarization. And in the end, what we have seen is, to put it like this way, we have a trench warfare of ideas from the one side to the other side. And if people who lean towards the center try to just participate, they receive flack from both sides. And as the thing progresses nowadays, we see also politicians and media, which, if it fits their agenda or purpose, name it as you like, they keep feeding this cycle. What do you think is going to be the steps that this kind of situation might break, and people will see that this polarization is actually against their own benefit?
Well, my advice is, put your helmet again into the trenches, I guess, because I have a lot of friends. I mean, I'm not on Twitter. A lot of people tell me, go on Twitter. Then I thought at some point the situation was so toxic in terms of the public discourse that whatever I was going to say was going to sort of create a this fake storm, which would last for a couple of days. But then, I would be preaching the converted on the other side, and then just give reasons for the other side to, think that I'm crazy or whatever. So, despite that, I think it's important, for people who hold the center and the middle ground to be there. There's no other way. I don't know any other way that this can happen. The good thing is, as I said before, reality has a way of winning over in the end. To give you an example, when the crisis first happened in Greece, there was all this stuff on the social media about how the Russians are going to give us money and we don't need the Europeans. How this was a conspiracy on natural gas that we're going to find in Greece, and that the Germans want to find the natural gas, so through the data we're going to do that. Eventually, most of the people, even the people who believe this stuff, I mean, there's still people who believe it, obviously, and they will be forever, have realized that there's no such way. There's no, that reality is reality. And I think that's important. Maybe they're going to learn in the end that, they have to find alternative sources of information. And I think they are, actually. It's a slow process. We will have to be very patient, I think.
I'm happy to report, Mr. Papahelas, that you're too young for Twitter now. It's for 70-year-old American autocrats. So that's right. Mr. Ambassador, please.
I'm Mr. Masu Nishibayashi, former ambassador of Japan in Greece. And it's a very great pleasure for us to welcome you here in Japan. And thank you very much for a wonderful presentation which enlightened us. Anyhow, I myself, while I was in Greece half a year ago, I decided to just ask Tokyo headquarters to invite Mr. Papahelas to Japan. And the competition is very high, but I pursued Tokyo. And Tokyo decided, because Mr. Papahelas is not one of the greatest, or probably the greatest journalist in Greece, not only Greece, but in Europe. And Tokyo was kind enough to invite. And I came back to Tokyo last July and retired last August. And it's really very nice to see you here to renew our friendship here in Tokyo. Having said so, I'd like to just have one question. While I was in Greece, there are a lot of rumors that the Syriza, the left-wing coalition party, will snap election at any time, general election. And among the diplomatic hope, when is the next general election coming? And but there has been no sign so far. Although probably the Syriza's supporting rate is very low, as low as 15%, as far as I know. And now Democratia, ND, has the 30% supporting rate. So that probably if Syriza snaps the election at this moment, they are going to lose, obviously. But what is the future outlook? When or is he going to, Mr. Tsipras, going to decide to snap election in the near future? Or what is your outlook? in Tokyo, Mr. Abe all of a sudden snapped the announcement, made an announcement for the election, snapping election, and he won. But at this moment, I don't think Syriza will win at this moment. What is your outlook of the domestic politics?
Mr. Baston, you've been away for 4 months. We'll become a boring country in the meantime. There's no more betting on when the election is going to be, as much as it was last spring, for example. But no, seriously, the current theory is that this government either will last until the spring of 2019, because there's also a European Parliament election then. And the idea is to hold both elections at the same time, so that people who are discontent with the government can vote against it in one ballot, the European one, and then supposedly vote for the government in the Greek election. I personally think that it's very likely we're going to have an election next year at this time. It's the most logical, because the fiscal adjustment program that we have ends next August. And I think this will give an opportunity to the Prime Minister to say that he got Greece out of the crisis, out of the program, and so on. Now, the current polls show the government about Mr. Tsipras about 10% behind the opposition. The most likely scenario is that he's indeed going to lose. We live in very unpredictable times, of course, so it's very hard, anywhere in the world to predict, what the political situation or campaign is going to look like. I think what the Prime Minister is trying to do, he's trying to move to the center, more to the mainstream. He's going to face a real challenge, I think, in the beginning of the year, because basically in the beginning of the year there will be an understanding that Greece is into the political cycle. We have very early political cycles. And then he will have to make a decision whether to be sort of very responsible, follow the program until the end and all that, or to follow a more populist kind of approach, sort of giving some benefits to some or hiring some people. It's going to be a hard choice, but I think it's going to be a critical choice. But an election, yeah, I think probably next year fall. But I've been wrong before, so don't think I'm faced by it.
Thank you. Please.
Yes. Julian Israel, Internet Japan. My question is to do with your view on Greece right now, and also you spoke about populism in a little bit of a negative way, I felt. And forgive me if my memory's bad, this is a couple of years ago. Last time I looked at Greece, you guys are going through that really big crisis, and Alexis Tsipras kind of backtracked on his promise to the people about accepting Germany's austerity package. Don't you think that if the Prime Minister kind of does a complete U-turn, then that just kind of fuels the populism against the government and establishment? And you also spoke of reality as well, that reality always wins. And what is this reality that you speak of? Because you mentioned that now you have very high youth unemployment rates. Southern Europe is in a very bad situation compared to the North. So, I mean, is this the reality going forward? So I just want to kind of ask you what your view is on this.
Mr. Tsipras campaigned on a very populist agenda before he was elected the first time. And basically he claimed that Greece would be able to not pay, not service its debt towards the Europeans, and in return he would get a less conditional membership in the Eurozone. He tried this out for 6-7 months, doing what we call famously the Varoufakis episode. He was his finance minister, and that didn't get us anywhere, basically because the Germans and the Dutch and others said that we're not going to change the rules because that means also others are going to ask for that. And then he went to a referendum. He won the referendum, and then he compromised. This is a paradox there. I haven't really understood it myself, why he did that, but he did. The thing is, he went to another election where he basically said, I want a mandate for my compromise. I want to, actually go back to on my promises and do a much more realistic kind of compromise. And he did. He was voted in. Is that? Yeah, I mean, I would rather, if Mr. Tsipras had been much more reasonable in his first campaign and didn't raise the expectations and all that. But he did. That was his call. I did an interview with Mr. Schäuble last week, who basically said, when he met Mr. Tsipras before the election, he said, I wish for you, for your own sake, that you don't win the election, because you cannot do any of the stuff that you're saying. But I think in the end, it's, for me, obviously disagree on this, but it's a sign that the country is maturing. When I say there's only one way, one reality, what do I mean? It's, first of all, Greece had a lot of problems. I mean, we didn't go bankrupt, because of an accident. We borrowed a lot of money because the euro was very cheap. The interest rates were very cheap. We had a lot of structural problems. We became much less competitive than we should be. And when the crisis happened, our politicians made a very big mistake. Instead of taking ownership for the reforms, they blamed it on others. And I think that was a huge mistake, because that's what basically made populism on the other side thrive. So I personally think there's no other way, in the sense that, okay, do we expect the Germans to keep lending money to us in order to keep our living standards? I don't. It's not going to happen. Whoever believes that, he lives in his own Pollyannish kind of world. Is there another source of money somewhere in the world that I don't know of? China, Russia? Nobody's going to give Greece the kind of money that we need to keep the same kind of standard of living. So the only answer, unfortunately, is access to the markets. We live in a world where the markets rule. And for the markets to lend you money, you have to become self-disciplined in fiscal terms. You have to be competitive. You have to be predictable. Otherwise, you can lose more of your GDP. You can become a much smaller country, get used to much lower kind of standards of living. And yes, you can become, like a European version of, North Korea or Cuba or something. But, I don't like that. I don't want that. I don't think most of the Greeks want that. So that's what I mean, when I say that reality, sets in. To be fair, however, because this sounds very one-sided, I think that the Germans especially, they made a lot of mistakes in the front, in the beginning of the crisis. I think they should have been much more strict on reform delivery and not on the fiscal adjustment, because there was a lot of goodwill in Greece to do all these reforms in the beginning. But once they started cutting pensions and salaries and all this, people heard reform and they were looking for their wallet. And also, I think there should have been debt relief up front. That was a huge mistake, both by the Germans and the IMF, because that would have made life much easier for the country. But I cannot see another, way of dealing with it. And this is the situation. I remember meeting the Swedish Prime Minister, the former Swedish Prime Minister, a year ago, and he told me that he felt like really weak when he went to New York, and he had to address a conference where a lot of analysts were there from U.S. investment houses and credit rating companies and all this. And they were so aggressive, and they were asking, what is Sweden going to do about this reform? How about the other? And he said, I couldn't do anything because my staff told me I depend on these people. If I lose these people, I have no money. I lose my, my political base, and that's it. So that's reality. It's not very nice, but that's what it is.
Please.
Hugh Kennedy from the Irish Chamber of Commerce. So Ireland went through a very similar situation. We were right 2011 with the Troika and the bailout and the visitors to Dublin, just as there have been visitors to Athens. But it seems we have come through mostly on the other side after a very difficult process as well. But what do you think is the difference? Why did Ireland come through? We took our medicine, we did what we were told. Is that the key to recovering, to coming out the other side for Greece? perhaps related to your answer to the previous question, the markets rule.
Well, I think in your case, there were many things. One was you're much more practical people than we are.
I'm not sure about that.
He's not speaking on behalf of the Foreign Ministry of the Greek Chamber of Commerce.
This is completely my own. And we're also over-politicized, so there was like no consensus in the beginning of the crisis about what to do. Every politician was fighting with each other, which was a big problem. I also think that you have a much more outward-looking private sector, which we don't unfortunately have in Greece. I think those are the two main differences. It's more a cultural thing than anything else, because it's interesting to know that Cyprus and Greece also got into the crisis, and we should be more closer culturally, we speak the same language and everything. But the evolution was very different because the Cypriots again were much more practical and much more. And also, I think in your case, institutions were stronger. We had real institutional deficiencies underneath the crisis. Civil service, the tax service not working. From what I've heard and read, Ireland is pretty good on this kind of sectors.
Just to quickly piggyback on that, we had an audience question here about Varoufakis, about his popularity. How much do you think we can account to a fear of not wanting to give the win to Varoufakis and Syriza? A European fear, right? In other words, Ireland did not have Syriza. Greece had Syriza. Greece had Varoufakis, very charming guy who was very well liked all over the world and also loathed all over the world. How much was it that the negotiators did not want to give the win to that government? A controversial question, but I throw it over to you.
I think there was an element of that, but it works both ways. I think that if Tsipras had gone the day he won the election, he had gone to Berlin and then to Brussels. That's what it was. And said, "Okay, I campaigned the way I did and all this, but listen, guys, I understand this is the real world, and I'm willing to put on the table this deal, and in return, I'm going to compromise on some other stuff." He would have gotten a much better deal than he got in the summer of 2016. I'm absolutely sure about it. He didn't do that because he was very inexperienced and because Varoufakis basically got carried away by it. He really thought he would intimidate the markets. I remember they announced the referendum on a Friday, and on Monday they were all together in a government office, and they were expecting to see whether the world markets were going to collapse because of the Greek referendum. It was a blip for about half an hour, and then nothing happened. And that's when they sort of imploded because they were like, maybe we're not as scary as we sound. To be fair, though, I do think there was an element. I call it, in quotes, educational element in all this, because we shouldn't forget that at the same time that we had Syriza and Varoufakis, we had the Podemos in Spain. There were sort of other voices. Similar voices all over Europe. So I think it was, at least in Schäuble's and Merkel's mind, it was very clear they didn't want to give in all the way to the Greek government because they thought that this was going to become, everybody was going to elect a Syriza.
Presidential.
And that's where a better deal or a dead deal or something.
More questions to the audience, please. Please.
Alison Murray, Executive Director of the EBC. If I understand it correctly, and please correct me if I'm wrong, you feel the solution for Greece is for the companies to become more competitive and to trade their way out of trouble. How aware are the companies of Greece of the upcoming EPA example between the EU and Japan? Because, for example, it's going to make a huge difference on food exports to Japan and increase profits. Is this being advertised or promoted at all in Greece, and what role will the media have in doing so?
I'm afraid it hasn't become a big issue because the agenda is so loaded with all kinds of items. I know that traditionally Greek businessmen who try to invest in Japan, they find it a very challenging environment in many ways. There's a lot of transparency and everything else, but sort of culturally complicated. do that. There's a new generation which is very sort of export-oriented, very outward kind of looking. And I know they're very fascinated by Japan as a potential. But no, the agreement, I mean, obviously we read it we have it in our foreign, coverage pages and all this, but it hasn't become a big deal. I'll make sure that people know. At least without my own small outlet.
Please.
Changing the topic, but why not? You mentioned that it's well known that Europe, after the Second World War, lived under the protection of the United States and benefited from that for a long time. As many European countries, of course, the same thing happened with Japan in a way. Now, the US is stepping back and is renegotiating this role, whether they are willing to keep that or not. What should Japan be doing? A very relevant question these days. What's your opinion on this is happening?
Well, I think there are three things you can do. One is what Prime Minister Abe is doing, which is striking a very close relationship with Trump. I think that was very smart, and I hear a lot of other leaders around the world are calling him to find out the secrets dealing with Trump. And I think in this specific case, it's important. It's not just institutions or the Defense Department. I think it's important. The second I would think is just to make sure. Yeah, I'm falling into the trap of becoming a Japanese expert now, but it's like dealing with
Saturday,
right. All the economic and demographic challenges. I mean, obviously, a stronger Japan is it's crucial, in my opinion, for the new kind of power balance, especially in this area. And the other thing is, what Japan is doing now, which is creating strategic alliances with, new friends like India or others. I think that's very important. I don't think any country can deal with this kind of situation on its own.
Another question? Please.
You've had a very long, illustrious career and interviewed many interesting subjects and produced documentaries and TV shows, etc. Could you just tell us what you are most proud of in your career? What were the most interesting moments for you or achievements in films and programs you produced?
Well, thank you. That's a good question. I'm very proud of a couple of books I've written because, news is ephemeral. Newspapers, even TV is very ephemeral, but books sort of stay in bookshelves. And occasionally, when you read another historian quoting you, you feel very, very proud, very significant. So I'm very. That's something that I think is significant. Well, there were moments which were important, like the Arafat. I did an interview with Yasser Arafat, which was, he didn't say much, but just meeting him was it was very important. Meeting a couple of American presidents was also, I think, one of the best interviews I've done for me was the senior Bush, who was really tremendous. I mean, the depth of his knowledge and the humility, the simplicity. I mean, it was a real, great experience for me. Yeah, and then I guess the thing I'm mostly proud of is that in our newspaper and also the TV show that I've been running, we've had a new generation of Greek journalists who are very good. They're very cosmopolitan. They're very outward-looking. They know what investigative journalism is, and it's gotten to the point where a couple of foreign organizations like Bloomberg rates our staff. One of them has become the Brussels bureau chief, and when that happens, it's a good feeling. And I think media has not been up to the standards it should have been in Greece, in my opinion, in many ways. We really failed the public because we basically gave people what they wanted to hear. It's easy to do that, of course. It's much easier than saying what you think. But I think we've done some good work in terms of changing this around. And if there was one moment when we made a decision that I'm very comfortable with, is when this crisis started. It was very, very difficult for us because everybody was saying, oh, this is unfair, you know, we're cutting our salaries. We had taxi drivers outside their office, bus drivers, you know, basically protesting against us. And we had to make a very critical decision, which was, do we go with the flow and saying, you know, it's the Germans' fault only, it's none of our fault, or is it something more complicated? We decided to go the other way, I mean, the sort of responsible way. It helped that we had a very wealthy owner who didn't have any business increase, so, you know, he could, you know, be very independent. But it was a very critical moment, and, you know, I don't regret it, because in the end, even people who disagreed with us or, you know, send us to hell, you know, tweets or everything else, they've come around to saying, well, you know, maybe these guys weren't so wrong like that. That's gives a sense of satisfaction.
Since you mentioned the office in Brussels, I have a question for you on both what Greece can do from the inside and the outside. First, Brussels reminds me of the Greek diaspora, and you're in a room full of Greek diaspora. So what role do you think that the Greek diaspora has in helping to strengthen Greece's position in the world? And secondly, you mentioned that China creates a new Greece GDP every few months, but the Greece actually is highly ranked in the soft power rankings. And in light of the upcoming Olympic Games here in Tokyo, how do you think we can effectively use these games and the connection to Greece to help further strengthen Greece and the economic tie between our two countries?
Well, the last part, you know, you need a good ambassador and a good commercial counselor.
That we have.
No, I think we should do much more as a government. I mean, as a Greek state, you know, you should have like the way you have Japan society. You should have a Greek society, or a Greek house in most major capitals, and work with the diaspora and all this. I know we have some of that, but you know, we need. The government doesn't have any money now. You can have foundations and wealthy Greeks pay for that. I mean, they're willing to do that because there are a lot of, you know, really well-meaning wealthy Greeks who want to do this kind of thing. So that's important. Now there are two kinds of diasporas. One is the 500,000 that we have lost in the last 6 or 7 years. I think they're incredibly important for the recovery of the country because they've become very professional wherever, you know, they've gone to. They have a completely different outlook. They're not like the Greeks of the 20s who left their village that didn't have any water service, don't want to go back. I mean, they know that Greece is a modern country and they can come back once they can find a job and business opportunities. And they're also in touch with Greece much more through Skype and everything else. So I want these people, you know, to come back. I mean, this is a challenge for us. We have to find ways of bringing them back. Now, the diaspora, the classic sense, I think, it should play, you know, a role because it has always played a role. I mean, when you look at Greek history, whenever we went through a rebirth, it was the diaspora that played a very important role, financially, politically, bringing in new ideas from the outside. Even the birth of the modern Greek nation was, you know, largely owed to the diaspora. You know, there are all kinds of ideas out there, but I think the most important thing right now is to find the best in the diaspora in education, in health, civil service, and get them together with our people on these kind of issues and talk in practical terms what needs to be done in order to change things. I think that's the best thing we can do, you know, not sort of talk about some kind of ideas. And in terms of culture, I think, you know, we can do much more. I mean, Japan has the Olympics in a couple of years. That's what a wonderful kimono, you know, being designed for that. I think this could be a real trigger to sort of, you know, bring the two cultures and the two countries closer, and for Greece to be able to export, you know, a new kind of image, not just the Parthenon, and explain what Greece is all about, you know, to the Japanese people.
I think because I'm sitting up here, time seems to have flown very quickly, but I think it's also because of the very interesting nature of our conversation. So what I'd like to do now is unfortunately close off the questions, ask Mr. Papahelas if he has any final comments to make, and then ask Mr. Danny Risberg of the European Business Council to make a few closing words for us, if that's okay with you, Danny.
So my only plea is for somebody to open a good Japanese restaurant in Greece, because we had one, it closed down, and we really miss it. You know,
any restaurateurs in the room? Thank you very much, Mr. Papahelas. I give it now to Danny.
Thank you for the opportunity to participate. I was listening to a glorious career, and the comments very educational for all of us. And I just want to congratulate you on your career and thank you for the time today to enlighten us on some. And we listen to the challenges because they're clearly there. With the immigration conflict, and we also hear challenges with unemployment and trying to get the youth back into participation, some polarization, political challenges, and geopolitical. So those are all real strong challenges I heard. But I also hear about the opportunities where now the economy is in a different situation, so maybe there's more opportunity in real estate and investment, as well as then we heard about the Olympics and maybe something could happen there, especially between Japan and Greece. So I want to think that the glass is half full rather than half empty. So we have a lot of opportunity, and I think this may be, please, if we can, let's use this for a start. There's a lot of great business people here, and the ABC, we're obviously a trade policy group, and it's our goal to help economies grow and have the EU and Greece be more and more successful in Japan. And one of the opportunities I'd like to say is that we think about the challenges, they'll have to be addressed, and I think Greece has started on that, but for the opportunity to take advantage. When you're here and you come to Japan, no one really knows this, but Japan has a lot of the same challenges. The GDP is not growing, it's been stagnant. We see a little bit better here, but when Japan's changed their economy, they have roughly, they're not an export country anymore, and many people think they are, and exports are roughly 13 to 14% of GDP. So again, I'll look at that as an opportunity for the Greeks to come here with business and be successful in Japan and grow not only the business relation but the cultural relation. So I'll just leave it at that. Let's again hope that the glass is half full and be successful at that. So thank you very much.
I was hoping you would end with an announcement that Philips is building a factory in Thessaloniki, but we'll leave that to next time.
Not yet.
That time will come. So thank you very much, everyone, for being here. I want to thank the members of the Board of Directors of the Greek Chamber of Commerce for being here. I want to thank our ambassador. I want to thank the Japanese ambassador. I'm sure I think about 10 Japanese foreign ministry affiliated individuals in the room as well. Let's keep this conversation going. And I'm very, very grateful to Mr. Papahelas for allowing us to have that large sphere that we can roll up this hill to get to the top together. You have given us that push, that motivation, and we hope we can continue to grow as an organization and as a community here in Japan. Thank you, everybody.